All right, now you should have gotten a notification that said recording or something in the corner of the window that says it's recording. I would love it if someone wanted to just mention, yeah, we see a red dot that's blinking, or yeah, we see something that says it's being recorded. If you notice that, go ahead and post that in the chat box as well, just so we make sure we have confirmation. Thanks, Amy. So our goal during this time is to talk at a conceptual level about what it looks like to teach from home and prioritize the practices involved in remote and distance education and learning and all of those things. And over the course of that conversation, to try to share some practical examples of things, some specific strategies to a degree, but largely to convey how to go about this experience in a bigger picture sense. And then as you have questions, or if we can share something more specific, certainly let us know. But part of our hope here is that if we can convey the ideas in a way that are practical and helpful to you, but if you need more, then we have additional resources as well as the virtual coaching office, which is and will be open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Throughout this time. And that's for anyone here who would like just to talk to one of us, or to have us demonstrate or show something more specific, even especially if it's like within the tools that you're trying to use, specific questions like that we might not be able to address in this setting. That's a good place to do so. And I'll talk about how you can best connect with us in some of those ways as well. So hope that this time has started to feel like you have a sense of direction. I know that as we're talking with so many teachers and so many administrators and others, that now that, at least in the state of Michigan, especially now that we've established a time frame, we're not going back to school this year, and we know what that means for students in terms of graduation, in terms of moving to the next grade level and such. Now we can start making decisions pretty quickly here about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And we know most districts at this point have provided some kind of guidance for teachers on what is expected. So some of what we're going to talk about will speak very directly to some of those things, and some of it it may require a bit more nuance or a bit more strategizing on your part. And we know, especially as we've looked through a lot of those materials, what districts and ISDs are publishing, we know it's all pretty similar. It's all pretty comparable. And so we've tried to design this conversation around the same kinds of ideas and make it as practical in that sense as we can. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to leverage that chat box as much as you desire, to whatever degree is helpful for you. And we'll do our best to try to address those things in whatever way works best for the group. So first thing I want to mention is that website that I just mentioned, the resources we have for you. This bit.ly/teachhomehub, no capitals. This is kind of a comprehensive site for the different resources and ideas and strategies that we're coming across, and we're keeping it as organized as we can, user-friendly and helpful. So what we're doing is we're just continuing to add to it and to grow it as time passes, with videos, with links, with a couple of different kinds of like resources, static and dynamic, and other things, as well as contact information for our team. So part of what I'll do at the end of our conversation here is I will just show you what that looks like and how you might want to leverage that at some point or another, if not throughout this time. So let's get into the 5 principles, 5 key principles as we've seen it and as we've discussed with educators and seen kind of the material that's out there. We've identified these in a kind of prioritized sense here as well. First is to connect with students, then to connect students with each other. Third, to establish consistent routines. Fourth, focus on engaging activities. And finally, just a reminder for all of us that less is more, especially when we're thinking about what we're trying to accomplish. What's the main goal? It's really not about progressing through as much content as possible while students are independent and on their own. And, fingers crossed, hopefully they do that. But certainly the goal here is to try to accomplish quality and to do some things that we know have enduring value that may not necessarily be specifically curricular. So we'll come back to that in more detail in a moment. Now, I wanted to mention this. So this is actually something from author, teacher, presenter Dave Stewart Jr. You see the book title on the right there. So the concept comes from this book. And Dave Stewart Jr. teaches in West Michigan. He's also global in his work supporting educators with professional development. His presentations are all over the place, all over the world. And he does some online courses as well on specifically on some of these key topics. Student motivation and engagement is kind of the prime one right now that obviously is very important for all of us. And in this kind of an environment, it gains value in a kind of exponential way, because we know that the students who are most motivated and engaged now really can see and do great things. You know, they can experience really positive things here. The students who are least engaged and motivated right now are not just failing to gain some of the potential positive things, but they're losing ground in significant ways. So we want to motivate and engage foremost in everything that we're trying to do here. Not necessarily to engage students, I mentioned this earlier, with content and curriculum specifically, but to keep them engaged with the experience, whether that's learning as, you know, as an enhancement or extension of the things that you might have done in the classroom, or that's just the relationships. Keep them engaged in the relationships. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But these 5 key beliefs that Dave Stewart Jr. outlines in his work are kind of a synthesis of a lot of research and establishing a sense of what do students need to believe about themselves and their environment in order to feel motivated and engaged. And this is the list he came up with. And in fact, it is in a priority order as well. Although he has said at different points, he's shifted the order around as he encounters different experiences and research. But for now, it kind of reflects this order and priority. First is credibility. And that means the teacher's credibility. The students believe that you are credible. And this falls under, according to Dave Stewart Jr., kind of 3 elements: care, passion, and I always forget the other C. It's CCP. But what he's really talking about here is he's talking about, do you know your role and material well, you know, in an expertise sense? That matters, but how much you care about the material as well as the student, it's kind of 2 facets there to the care piece, matters just as much, if not more at times, and how passionate you are about that. And so I think about it, even in a time like this, how can we reflect passion for the things that we're trying to convey to students when we can't be in the room with them? You know, so many of us thrive in relationship directly with students. That's part of what being an educator, you have to cultivate that constantly. And so you're good at it and you gain from it. It's fulfilling for you and the student. And that is impossible to do right now in the same sense. And so how can we still convey that passion and show that care without being able to sit down in the room with the students? And certainly, as you well know, there are ways. They're not as effective as in person as we would guess, but there are some good and positive strategies and approaches. We'll get to that. And then number 2, the value, and that means students feel like the work is valuable. And they feel like it's valuable both inherently, the work itself, as well as for themselves. Do they feel like they see it as important in their own lives? And so that's, you know, is it relevant? Is it real? All of those kinds of things matter. And so when we think about the kind of work that we're going to have students doing independently and alone or at home or those kinds of things, can we make sure as best as possible that it's worthwhile? And I don't mean that it wouldn't be, because you're choosing to have things that are worthwhile and obviously in your opinion, as well as in for the student's time. But most importantly, can we make sure that students see that? And whether that's we try to connect with them and articulate it, or we try to choose the kinds of things that have ground for students to connect it to their own lives in some way. Number 3 is belonging. And naturally, if students feel like people like them do and care about things like this, that's kind of how the belonging sense goes. So do other people like me care about this and try hard at this and all of those kinds of things? And if they do, I'm more inclined to do so as well. I'm just more motivated to engage with it also. So we need to connect students with each other in some ways so that they see each other in this struggle together. The struggle being trying to learn in kind of an obscure way and trying to engage with education, teaching and learning experiences and such. But it's not normal and it's not familiar. And so if they can see each other in that as well, that has benefit, significant benefit. And then, as you might guess, 4 and 5 here are pretty straightforward. Students should believe that if they try, that their effort will help them gain ground, that they will improve because of their effort. And if they see that clearly, if they see that it's worth trying because they can succeed, that kind of bleeds into number 5. So the efficacy is, if I try, if I do this, I can be successful. And so we need to make sure that the things we're asking students to do are not too difficult, not necessarily like academically difficult, but is it a kind of task that students can accomplish given the limitations they're going to be experiencing, just like the limitations you're experiencing right now. You know, you've got family around you that are distracting in positive and negative ways, you know, naturally. You have a number of other kinds of things that are not normally present in your professional work when you're at school. And those things take away from your ability to focus and engage in some ways. And the same is true for students. So can we make sure that they feel like the work that they're trying to do, that they can do it, that they can do it successfully, and that it's, you know, all of the above then. So that's why we wanted to just mention these 5 key beliefs, because clearly it's very closely interrelated. And I think if you were to start there and just look at how can I make sure that students see and feel these kinds of things, you're making really positive ground, and you're tackling some of the foundational elements that all of the districts and ISDs are starting with for this remote learning experience. And so let's get into those things. Number 1, connecting with students. Obviously, there are a lot of ways you can do that with technology. But not every student, of course, has same kind of access to technology. We know that. That's being accounted for in these decisions. So your options are widespread, depending on age of students, depending on their situation with technology, as well as what their family's comfortable with. But certainly, like what we're doing right now, there are a number of tools. And even if you were to use Zoom for this, there are a lot of tools that allow you to connect with kind of like a video virtual live conversation that have other features, like we're recording, we're sharing screens, all of those kinds of things too. We can do individual, we can do groups, and all of that. Most of the kinds of things that are available right now for this have some kind of perk that isn't usually the case. Like Zoom is basically a free account now while this is going on this time. And I know Google Meet is another one that many others are using. If you're on Schoology, Schoology has a built-in conferences app for enterprise users. So if your district has paid for the Schoology Enterprise, that is very similar to what we're doing right now, but it's built right into Schoology. So students would just go to your normal course and find the meeting there, and they could watch it afterward if you record it, all of those kinds of things too. Some really, really easy ways to engage virtually. Now, the messaging type of thing is built into almost everything. So if you have a learning management system that you're using, there is a way to message or chat or those kinds of things inside the learning management system. They pretty much all have it. Naturally, things like Class Dojo are popular for like rewarding behaviors, but they include some great communication tools. I know the other one that I think it was called Class Tag is one that a number of teachers I've worked with in the past are starting to use. Remind is another great way for you to communicate out with parents and students. Again, depending on age of students, that matters. But why Remind is especially popular right now is because it's an easy two-way option as well. And some of these things, like your learning management system, might not let parents actually message you in it. And so then there's a different thing that they have to do to message you. So depending on what tools you're already using, we'll come back to that point, by the way, about how we decide what tools serve our needs right now, but certainly a lot of ways to do the direct messaging types of things. And then I would encourage, if you're not sure, the phone call is always a great way to start with these things. Like, have the phone call early on to say, what are the best ways to communicate with your student, with the parents, establish that right away, because you may not know some of the limitations still. And that can be probably the easiest way to connect if there are concerns, limitations. And then of course there's social media. if you're comfortable with that, if you use it in that way, I know a lot of teachers have started things like Facebook pages for their class to just engage with each other and for them to share some certain kinds of things. Depending on the kind of platform, there are better and worse platforms for this kind of thing. I wouldn't think that Instagram is probably a great engagement tool, but it might be a great, like, publicly sharing just fun and interesting things. So it just depends. Number 2. So I just want to mention one more thing then about, there's a good balance with connecting with your students one-on-one. I think about the instance where a student's like, why am I on the phone with my teacher right now? Like, what's the point of this conversation? It doesn't really feel like there's a need for it, or that we are accomplishing anything significant. And that's an important question to ask. You know, if you're trying to connect in too many ways, too much, that's an oversaturation problem that can be an obstacle. And if you're not trying to connect enough, then it makes it more difficult to know, to touch base well with students. We think about high quality personal connections. The academic side of things is not the most important part of that conversation most of the time. You want to try to leverage that balance well. So obviously that's going to look differently for your age of students, for their comfort, for your comfort, and some other things too. We'll get into some of those other things here. Number 2 is connecting students with each other. As mentioned, this really fuels that belonging belief quite a bit. Students feel like they see each other in the struggle together, and that adds to their willingness to engage with whatever the thing is. Personally, I have seen this in action in powerful ways, like things that I didn't intend for the students to be engaging together in these ways, and yet they did. And because they did, the positive consequences were unpredictable. I didn't know that was going to happen, and it did. So the example here is late on a Friday night, and students are in your learning management system chatting away about some task or assignment, but really the conversation isn't about the assignment. It's just that was the context where the conversation started. And I think this is actually a really important lesson for all of us, that if we can provide some natural way, like at this time, it's kind of an open time for students to come in and interact with each other about certain things. Give them the certain thing to interact about, because it makes it easier for them. And sometimes that could be, something like, what's something interesting you've been watching on TV, or a game you've been playing. It doesn't have to be school related, but whatever the context is, it's an opportunity for those students to, especially those students who don't engage well with social media or informal social communication. This is the kind of thing that allows them to engage and open up a bit, because there is an expectation, a clear expectation. So that's the other thing about when you're going to connect students with each other, provide clear expectations for that time and why they are connecting with each other. It helps both in defeating some of the potential negative fallout that can always happen with any kind of communication. It also just kind of levels the playing field for, degrees of comfort. And, you think about the introvert versus the extrovert. The introvert always wants a reason to talk. Like, why are we talking right now? I want to know. The extrovert just always wants to talk. And those are obviously extreme exaggerations, but the same is true with your students. You'll have some who would just want every opportunity to just post random stuff. And you'll have others who are like, I'm not going to say a thing until there's a reason to say something. So both of those should be accounted for with these kinds of things. And then, of course, the mediums and formats are very similar to what we just discussed. And I think within your learning management system, whatever your students are already comfortable doing. So if you haven't been using a learning management system, but you have some tools that they're familiar with, keep using those tools, because they're more likely to use the things that they know best, whatever those things might be. And of course, you see the bottom there. There's a lot of great tools for video sharing that don't require real time and live communication. And those are helpful because students won't all be available at the same time for the same reasons. And then same kind of thing with like shared documents where they can interact, but they don't have to do so in real time. And they can do so in real time, but it doesn't have to be as exposed as like a video type experience, which has pros and cons. So number 3, establishing routines. And this is the part where we talk about how you're structuring the experience for students to be successful. And I think most importantly, before I say anything specifically, most importantly is you want students to be able to anticipate when and what is going on. If they can do that to at least some degree, and students and parents, I should say. I've been talking with my sister a lot. She has 4 kids. They're all in school right now. elementary school, all 4 of them. And she's just like, she's struggling because she doesn't know exactly what to expect on certain things at certain times. And so she's guessing, and the student, her kids aren't always up to snuff on what's going on. So that's a challenge. But aside from that, there are some different kinds of ways you can approach it. I'll just start with the main things here being your learning management system, or whatever digital space you get your students together on. That is now your classroom. And we really need to think about it in that way, because it's the only place now where students essentially are all in one spot. And so we want to try to leverage that in some strong and consistent ways. We'll come back to that. And then there are obviously different ways, time frame wise, to organize routines, whether you have certain routines every day. It doesn't have to be fixed on a time of day, but certain things every day, or certain things every day of the week. Like on Mondays, it's this, on Wednesdays, it's this, or maybe it's by a little bit larger by week. Each week there are X, Y, and Z things that we're doing. And then the last piece, just as I mentioned, consistent and clear. The formulaic piece helps. So if you have something that's reliable, then for your sake and the student's sake, it just eases the burden of wondering. So here's a couple examples. At the secondary level, certainly leveraging the day of the week thing makes sense. Mondays are devoted to this kind of experience or activity. And so maybe Mondays are when we, as a whole class, try to connect. We do a video web chat like what we're doing right now, a webinar type experience. We have 4 fun discussion boards. I like that comment there just in our description, but discussion boards that students can post at ongoing. One of the things I talked to a teacher about recently was they have this ongoing chat where students can post in a discussion thread. That's just like, I can't remember. It was like things that you're watching, reading, and playing, right? So games, shows, books, although it doesn't have to be specifically books that you're reading, that kind of thing. And so students are just posting in there things they're watching, reading, and playing. And I think that's a great idea. But what they do on Mondays, or whenever it is, I don't know when they're actually connecting, but when they connect all together, the teacher will actually like highlight some of the things like, oh, I noticed this, so when I'm talking with the whole class, I'm highlighting some of the things. But then I think at some point or another, the students asked if they could also comment on some of those things. Even though the discussion was happening, it's just something about when we're all together in that space and we're just talking about like, someone put this game on there, and it just so happens almost everyone in the class is also loving that game. And so they want to talk about it. And I say, why not? If it's a video game and it's not anything to do with school, I say, why not? When you can provide that way for students to engage with each other, that matters, because they don't have that opportunity, many of them, at all right now, especially if they're not on social media, which depending on the age of your students, they may or may not be. So this structure is a helpful way to think about it. Tuesdays then are like instruction, where I post videos. I might have like office hours where students can come and ask questions, or I specifically schedule time to meet with students for more like one-on-one or small group type instructional experiences. And then Wednesday, maybe that's when I connect them and they collaborate. Thursday, they share whatever they've done or accomplished. And that's where you can have like they're submitting an assignment for me, or they're posting something for each other, some kind of like video, like Flipgrid, share a video about the thing you're doing, something like that. And then Fridays, maybe that's like a learn independently, or like a genius hour type experience. Or if we have a program that is kind of like curricular and adaptive, where they can work through problems or they can work through situations and it gives them the content, that might be a day to say, okay, spend half an hour on math, Excel, or whatever the thing is. So that kind of a structure can be a helpful way to think about it. But for elementary, we tend to see the idea to break it up by subject area. So many of you may already have articulated to you how to do this. We saw a few district plans now that include a very specific instruction about what you're doing here, similar to what we have, although I noticed that some of them are like reading and writing on the same day as English or something like that. And then there's like a specials or language thing on a different day. We obviously didn't include that here, but whatever the structure is, it makes sense for students to, and we mentioned this earlier on, to focus very specifically with their time. So instead of trying to do 3 or 4 things in one day, just try to do one thing in that day and anticipate a pretty limited amount of time devoted to it. We noticed the recommendations from the state on the amount of time, and it's pretty limited. So think about how much time they're going to spend and how much you would want them to accomplish on that one thing. Now, number 4, focusing on the engagement level of the activities instead of on the curricular or content side of things. Certainly, I think there's so many different ways that people are interpreting this and going about this, that this is one where I can share just a few examples, but it's going to look so differently by subject area, by age level and grade level and those kinds of things. And even like what teachers are comfortable with. You know, some teachers are out there making videos in their backyard and having, doing these science experiments and having students try to replicate that stuff. And others, you've got 12 kids at home and 4 dogs, and that's just not feasible, whatever the situation may be. Obviously, this looks very differently, but there's some great tools that can help with certain dynamics here. Screencasting is a function and feature that probably all of us should be doing at this point, to be able to create videos similar to like what we're doing here. If I could create a video with slides, or if I could create a video of myself talking with something on screen, that's the principle here. Loom and Screencastify are both the kind of the fan favorite tools in education for the most part with screencasting. And certainly there's a good reason for it. They've got a lot of features that are available to you to do some editing with the videos, as well as really easy to share, and they're built into Chrome. So if you have a Chromebook or laptop or any of those things, it's going to work just great for you. And then on the sharing video side, if you're not already familiar with Edpuzzle and Flipgrid, those are 2 that we certainly recommend a lot. But finding tools that help you to share a video, help students to be able to share a video with you or with each other, as well as doing more things with the video. So like Edpuzzle's instance, you can add questions, you can add other content into the video in a couple of different ways. And there's really easy ways to then share that within, if you have a class website or a learning management system. So those are great tools for that kind of thing. But the point being, video is going to be kind of your anchor when we talk about what you're doing and how you're sharing that with students. Video is kind of the foundation of so much of it. And it needs to be, as much as possible, so far as your students' limitations can accommodate that. So if your students have no technology at home, then video is not an option. But if they have something that they can see and stream short videos, and short is the operative word here, this is going to be the key, definitely. So a number of tools that allow for different kinds of like more complex things are available, but not quite as widely depending on what devices you have and such. If you have more questions on those kinds of things, we'd be happy to answer. That's a great, like the virtual coach, virtual office kind of thing. And we can talk through what technology you're using and how best to leverage some of that. So talking about what kinds of resources can help you find and leverage these kinds of ideas, these engaging ideas. So one of the things that the governor said in Michigan in her announcement about the school year situation was focusing, or trying to focus more on like project-based learning types of activities. Problem-based learning and project-based learning are very similar without the scale. So PBL and PRBL. And what we find is there's some great resources out there to help you find things that might connect or get ideas. And we included a few of them here just by name. And you can certainly Google that. Obviously, you can't click on your screen right now, but you can find these as well on that resources site that we mentioned. And I'll come back to that again at the end. But what you're going to get here, like with Emergent Math, is a lot of problem-based learning activities that you can give to students, or students can engage with some of them on their own. I think that like the Would You Rather math is just an example of a way to do something in an interesting way. And it's literally what you see there in that example. Questions like, here's the thing, Cheez-Its to cover a rectangle. Would you rather have, and here's the 2 different sizes of Cheez-Its to cover that rectangle. Things like that. And then I think you see that chocolate milk one, that's the second one in the math box there, the intensity of chocolate milk, goes with that visual that's actually in the middle. And it's, so these are the kinds of things that students probably will enjoy doing more because they can actually do it like in the kitchen with their family kind of thing. Those kinds of things can be great, especially in math, science, and some cross-curricular types of things. So that's one example, and we certainly encourage you to take a look at some of those other resources on the resources site that I'll mention. And then in the middle there, I think if you were to think about like the way that most STEM and STEAM projects are designed or intended to be designed, you can try to leverage that thinking quite a bit, makerspace type thinking, you know, all of that kind of stuff, where you're having students engage with whatever materials they have on hand. And there may not be a lot of some of the, you know, so they might have like scraps of things in abundance, but they don't have like the Kiva blocks that you might have at school. But that's okay, because whatever the materials are on hand, being able to try to leverage those things in like a project-based STEM type of thinking, design thinking kind of pursuit. So the cross-curricular ones there, I want to mention both of those links, and you'll find them on that site. Both of those links have a lot of ideas for different kinds of projects that in most ways can be done at home on their own. Depending on, some of them are more specific to something in a school, but most of them can be done at home. The one thing to think about with something like this is we talked about that structure. If you have like a week devoted to just one project, we're going to do this one thing the whole week, or 2 weeks or something. Well, that might be a little too long, but if you were to do that over a period of time, the sustained interest and curiosity is there, as well as, you know, just think about the depth of thinking. And that's the only thing the students are focusing on during that period of time, that has some advantage, certainly. So I encourage you to take a look at some of those. I don't know if you can actually see my mouse now. It just floated around there for a second, but take a look at some of those project ideas on our resources site. And the High Tech High one, it's not just high school. The High Tech High and High Tech Network, New Tech, as well as what's the other one called? PBL Works. They both have tons of resources for K-12 in project-based learning. So the last thing I want to mention here with this fourth principle is how collaboration and conversation can happen with some of these other things. We mentioned some of it, so I don't want to just repeat, but whatever the work is you're having students do, using tools that allow for collaborative work just makes sense. And if they're already familiar with things like Google tools, leveraging some of that now more than ever has a ton of benefit. And then we talked about Flipgrid. If you're not familiar with that, that's a great tool for just being able to post video responses asynchronously to things. If you have the enterprise version of Schoology, you also have, and your students have, the ability to post video and audio responses instead of typing in the discussion boards. So you've seen when you create a discussion forum in Schoology, there's a toolbar that appears whenever you're typing in the box. On that toolbar, there's a microphone icon for those who have the enterprise version. So that's a great tool as well. And then if you're using Seesaw, just really emphasize the video and audio types of things. Getting students to talk with and show things to each other matters. And especially when we're thinking about how the activities that we're asking them do, how they can share and showcase the experience of doing that activity. And that can be a conversation piece with each other. So this fifth one, as mentioned, it's just really important to think about how much is necessary to make progress in whatever the area is that we're looking for. And I know there's quite a bit of direction on this depending on your school district. So the one thing that I just want to mention, certainly you see just kind of a couple of points there, but I definitely want to mention the creativity side of things. So this is an opportunity for students to think in a different space than they're used to in school. So school has a lot of pressure, and I think that's important to remember. In the environment of school, there's a lot of pressure in terms of like performing, in terms, you know, some of those things. And for many of your students, that pressure has kind of subsided. Now, not for all of them. Some of them, there's more of that at home than at school. That's very true. But for many of them, the kind of thinking that they do at home can and oftentimes is different than the kind of thinking they do at school. So I encourage that, trying to leverage their creativity in different kinds of ways. And you may see fruits from that labor because of the nature of this time too. So I'm gonna come back to the resources site here for a minute. I'm just, I'm glancing at the time. We're certainly gonna have time for questions at the end as well if there are some. But if you have more questions or something specific that you want to address with one of our team, you see now the 4 of us on the bottom there. That's that virtual coaching link, the second one down. And if you've used that in the past, or if you're familiar that your school or district has access to it, it's the same as it's always been, except that it's just available more than it's been in the past. But if you are not familiar with that, or if you don't know whether your school has access to it, we're really trying to just extend that to just about anyone and everyone who is willing and able to engage with us there. This is such a difficult time for us to be supported because we don't have access to our normal support networks in the same way that we have in the past. So if you're feeling that, if you're feeling the need for support in ways that you don't have readily accessible to you, feel free to use that virtual coach. That's why we're here, and that's what we're trying to do for teachers. Also, then, we have this resources site where you'll be able to continue to access links to examples and strategies and tools and resources. We've got databases. I'm going to show you that here in just a moment. And then if you ever just feel the need to email or send a quick call or text, we've got some of those communication lines there as well. So remember, because I'm about to navigate away from this page here, this is being recorded and the video will be available to you on that resources site you see at the top there, bit.ly/teachhomehub. This recording, as well as the other recordings of this webinar, we're doing this a couple of different times, as you noticed in the registration. And so you can find any of those recordings on that resources site once the webinar has been completed. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that site here for a bit. And if you want to stop me, or if you want to ask Amy something, and just continue to use the chat box there, but something strange is going to happen for a moment. So just bear with me as I shift which screen is visible here. It's likely to, yep, we just lost it for a second, but it's likely to come right back once I do this. Okay, so now you should see that again. And by that, I mean something that says teaching from home in the middle of the screen. And certainly if you don't, someone holler at me or holler at Amy. I don't have the chat window open, so I can't see if you say that at the moment. But if you do, Amy can let me know too if it's not visible. So this website will live indefinitely. It certainly is going to be available to you as much as long as needed and as it is relevant. Thanks, Amy. She just mentioned to me that you can see it. So here's what you see when you go to the site. It's very similar in topic and content to what we just discussed. So structured the same way. You've got your navigation through those 5 principles, and then as well an additional links and resources button at the bottom of the navigation, and it's on kind of the main page. We've got a brief intro video there, which is redundant. If you've been a part of this webinar, you don't need to watch that because it's the same thing in more concise terms. And then if you know anyone else who may want to participate in this webinar again, but missed today, we have one more opportunity tomorrow at 2 p.m. and that's with Amy, who's monitoring our chat right now. And she'll be presenting and hosting that for anyone who still is interested. And we have a pretty full room scheduled right now, but certainly room for others if you know that anyone would like to. And then just a quick note that I mentioned that virtual coach page a couple of times, but you'll be able to connect with a coach just by clicking on that button at the bottom of this site. It's on every page. So if you forgot or forget, or at some point in the future think, I need to connect with these guys, I got a question, it's there Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, and just click the button and you can jump right in. So let me just quickly mention or show a couple of things here. This is what you're going to get when you go to the site. You're going to get just kind of an overview of some of the topics. You're going to see some links to a lot of the tools related to what we're discussing. Blooms, that's the one I was trying to think of earlier. Class Tag's another one, but Blooms. So anyway, you're going to see those links here, so you can just click right to them, as well as a number of other examples of things and some strategies for things depending on the topic. And as we go, meaning just as time progresses through the end of this school year, if you will, we'll continue to add things to it that become relevant and valuable. So if there are some improvements on some of the things here, if there are some changes, any of that kind of stuff, we'll keep track of that here on this site. This, by the way, this video here for the routines page is an example similar to the one I outlined in the slide, but it's a little bit different. It's like 2 minutes long. So that might be worth a watch if you're looking for some other ideas for how to structure your time still. And then we've got a bunch of links. Here we go. Different videos, examples, strategies. Some of these are actual strategies that teachers are sharing, some tips for different approaches to things like how to use some of these tools, as well as you can see Google Classroom in there, Schoology's in there a couple of times, Screencastify and Loom. So those are going to be helpful resources if you're not sure how to use or do some of the things discussed, or you want some more strategies. You'll notice in there, like there's a suggestion here from a teacher. This strategy is from a teacher. I'm saying this, but I don't actually know if you can see my mouse, but those things are all helpful links related to this routines kind of idea. And then for the engaging activities one I mentioned to you earlier, we've got these links. Here are many of those links. So the example ones for like the STEM and the Mrs. O's activities, those are there. There's a couple of others with, scroll down into it, with some of these tools down here as well. And then I think I was just going to skip through. So the less is more page is explaining a little bit more detail and examples about what we meant with some of those topics. But in the links and resources page, this is the one, especially as time goes on, we're going to continue to try to keep some relevant and practical things here for you. So already we have found a number of great sources of technology tools that are available to you that are organized in different kinds of ways. So our tech tool database here at Communications by Design that we maintain is like there's an alphabetical as well as topical navigation, so you can see tools for discussion, tools for creativity, and those kinds of things. That's what ours does in that sense. But obviously there's a lot of companies right now that are promoting their material for free so that you can access it during this time. And we've got some resources there so you can find what some of those premier or premium activities or sites and apps are available to you. And then we found this one this was today, in fact, some more distance learning tools, and they're organized in some pretty convenient ways with type and topic. So it's an easier way to look through some of that. And then we just encountered recently as well, and I don't know that it's even linked in here yet, that Common Sense Media has done just something huge with trying to organize some things that are helpful and practical for educators and parents. So if you haven't already seen what Common Sense Media just came out with, it's very good. Here it is. I was looking for it there. Wide Open School by Common Sense Media. So we did link it down at the bottom of the more lesson ideas. And there's just a ton of stuff there too. And if you're familiar with Common Sense Media, they really try to gear their stuff toward what's appropriate for certain grade levels, for certain areas. And they do a pretty good job with that too. So all of this is available to you now and through the rest of this time, and will continue to grow or evolve as better and different things become available to us. And especially if you see something here and you think, okay, this is something I want to explore, but I don't want to do that necessarily just on my own. That's where the virtual coach, connect with a coach button right at the bottom. That's a great way to use that, because then we're happy to help and support you as you're looking through these things. We're also great for, the quick question. The number of times that teachers have jumped in and just said, hey, I'm trying to add this discussion thing in Schoology and it's not doing what I thought it should do. And you share your screen, because it's an option there when you're doing that with us. And we just see exactly what you're doing, walk through it with you, and 10 seconds, 15 minutes later, we're done. So that's the intent here with what we're trying to do for teachers. And so if I can summarize, if I can take us kind of back to the beginning, if you will, we're really trying to look at what do students need the most during this time, as we've talked within our team and with educators at every level at this point. And as we've read the materials coming out from the state and from, nationally as well, and what is it that students need the most? And we know for certain that the connections are the most important thing. We don't know what life is like for our students right now. And because we don't know that, we don't know what they need. And I know so many school districts are doing a great job already with some of these things, starting right away. But as an individual teacher, what does it mean for me to be able to connect with my students enough so that they feel like they are seen, so they feel like their time and efforts right now matter, and so that they can engage with a positive and constructive relationship both with the teacher and their peers. So we got to try to create opportunity for that, most importantly. And then beyond that, what are we doing with our content and curriculum matters, depends quite a bit on the school and the district. Certainly you have some directives and expectations there, but to whatever degree that license allows for, trying to focus on what are the essential skills that matter, the kinds of things that we don't want to lose if we can help it. What are those kinds of things? And what are the kinds of engaging and real world types of experiences that we can provide for students, all of that kind of stuff. And when we really come back to what we're doing here during this time, it's what CBD, what Communications by Design is doing during this time, is trying to make that job a bit easier for all of you. And so if we can do that in any way, certainly reach out to us, however it works best. And we will be happy to do just that. So at this point, certainly if you've had enough and it's 9 o'clock, or it's going to be 9 o'clock in 10 or 12 minutes, you're welcome to depart. I'm not going to keep you here for any particular reason beyond this moment. But if you have other questions, or if you want to try to ask or engage with us in some still more ways at this moment, certainly stick around. And we've got the chat box. I can unmute some people if that's needed or helpful in our conversations, and we'll try to make it as valuable as we can still. I'm going to end the recording here in just a moment. So if there's anything else, let us know. And otherwise, thanks for your time. Thanks for your evening. Thank your families for sharing you a bit with all of us. I'm looking at the numbers here. We've had at various points in time, we've had 26, 27 educators here in the room. And I know I can't see the names yet. I'm going to check after the fact, but I know some of you were coming in from like North Carolina. I saw a couple from Indiana or Ohio or something too. And so, I appreciate your willingness to join us for this time and experience. Let us know if we can help you more. Thanks. And I'm just looking at that chat there. Thank you to all of you. I'm not going to reply back and say thank you in the chat to everyone, but thank you for your kind words and your time as well. Yeah, Andy, what Amy said. No fee right now. Nope, not at all. Great suggestion, Andy. Thank you.